Oral questions, questions orales. The Honourable, the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, in his election platform, the Prime Minister stated, "A Conservative government will preserve income trusts by not imposing any new taxes on them." Canadians who voted for the Prime Minister did so based on a deception. What's equally concerning, Mr. Speaker, they invested their life savings based on a false promise. Today, thanks to his misrepresentation, Canadians are about $25 billion poorer. Everything the Prime Minister will tell this House today about the impact of income trusts on government revenues, he knew when he made that promise. Why do you engage in a deception of such monumental and costly proportions to all Canadians, Mr. Speaker?
Right Honourable the Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let's be absolutely clear. Let's be absolutely clear. The commitment of this party was not that we would have no taxes for TELUS. It wasn't that we would have no taxes for BCE. It wasn't that we would have no taxes for foreign investors or no taxes for major corporations. It was a commitment to protect the income of seniors. The Minister of Finance has brought in an age credit. He has brought in pension splitting. He is imposing fair taxes on the corporate community, and I challenge the Liberal Party to support those things.
The Honourable, the Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's not what he said in the election. He assured the men that income trusts were essential for those who have spent their lives raising families, saving for their retirement, and building this country. Innocent Canadians suffering an economic bloodbath today because they believe the Prime Minister. He gave his word. Canadians acted on his word. He then broke his word. He knew then what he knows now, and he has no excuse. How can he explain to Canadians the colossal misrepresentation he made in the last election? How can he justify to Canadian citizens his $25 billion breach of faith to Canadians, Mr. Speaker?
Order. The Right Honourable the Prime Minister. Order.
Mr. Speaker, contrary to what the Leader of the Opposition says, lots has changed with income trusts in the past year, including tax holidays for major corporations that this government does not and will not support. The Minister of Finance has acted decisively, and he has acted with integrity. Unlike, I should mention, the previous government, and let me quote a prominent Liberal, Warren Kinsella, who says,
Order. The Prime Minister is giving his answer. We have to be able to hear his answer and the quotations. The Right Honourable Prime Minister has the floor. We'll have a little order.
Speaker, is that now if the member from Wascana had still been in charge, we might have heard about this from our brokers on the weekend, just like in the good old days.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. How despair makes bad friends. He was saying that income trusts were here forever, that they could be guaranteed that never would there be new taxes on them. And people believed him. They invested their savings based on the Prime Minister's word. How can he justify his contempt for those people who invested? How can he justify the losses of people's income? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Once again, Mr. Speaker, the opposition leader and his party has a choice to make. They should support the division, the pension splitting tax measures we've brought in. They should support help for pensioners. They should support fair taxation for major corporations. It is their decision. We haven't made our decision, and we do not have to explain it to the RCMP. The honourable member for Westmount-Villemaki.
Last election, the Conservative Party lied to require Canadians to wait on years in this country, and the consequences are enormous. Monsieur le Président, les Canadiens ont investi.
Mr. Speaker, they indicated that they would not attack income trusts that enabled people to invest and to pay for their medication, pay for their household, their rent. How can the minister explain that he has done exactly the opposite of what he said in writing during the election campaign? The Honourable Minister of Finance. Order, please.
Mr. Speaker, in response to the member's comments, I'm pleased to inform the member that there is substantial provincial support, of course, for this initiative, including by the Minister of Finance of the province of Quebec, with whom I spoke last evening. This is an issue of national importance, not only with respect to the Government of Canada, but also with respect to the provinces, Mr. Speaker. And it is a question of tax fairness. Should corporations pay their fair share of taxes in Canada, or should we shift the balance more and more onto individual taxpayers? It isn't it.
The Honourable Member for Westmount-Villemaki. Order, please. Mr. Speaker, this is like a bull in a china shop, the way the minister announced the radical changes to the tax system yesterday. Today, following the announcement, people are looking at their savings and seeing them melt away because the TSX and other exchanges are seeing their values dropping. People are going to have to work longer and harder in order to make up for this, and the minister is responsible. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, it's been said, and I quote, that the fact of the matter is this is an important public policy question. It has to do with revenue to all governments, including the provinces. It has to do with fairness in the business system of this country, and it has to do with productivity and growth for the future. We would like to get the policy right for the long term. I didn't say that, Mr. Speaker. It was a member for Wascana in this House on September 27, 2005.
Order. L'honorable.
The Honourable. Order, please.
Order. 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 L'honorable.
The Honourable Member for Laurier-Sainte-Marie has the floor. We would need some order. Mr. Speaker, the former chief economist of the World Bank indicated that climate change would have a disastrous effect on our economy in the world, $7 trillion. If we do not respect the Kyoto objectives, the government here has introduced a bill that will only help the industry. How can the Prime Minister justify sending his Environment Minister to a climate change conference when he's destroying the Kyoto Accord here? Mr. Speaker, the Bloc Québécois seems to have done a flip-flop. He is insisting that we meet the objectives of Kyoto. Now he says that we're not doing. In fact, it's our responsibility to act. We will be at that conference, and we do have a plan. which includes mandatory targets for all industries, including the oil industry. The Honourable Member for Laurie-Sainte-Marie. Mr. Speaker, the Greenpeace, the Suzuki Foundation, the Canadian Auto Workers, and other organizations have all indicated that there is no real plan to deal with climate change. We look at Britain and Germany that have dropped their emissions by 17 and 14%. How can the Prime Minister accept that we are actually co-chairing an international conference on this matter? Mr. Speaker, it would be irresponsible if we did not attend this conference. This is why my minister will be there. I have to say, though, that Mr. Boisclair indicated on the weekend that for Canada, he wants a mandatory clean air strategy. I think the Bloc Québécois should consult the leader of the Parti Québécois, the Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While the Environment Minister is advising Alberta and working with the Kingdom of the oil industry, Quebec is actually reducing its emissions. How can he say this when Quebec actually has the best GHG reduction record in the country? Mr. Speaker, we have always, we do support Quebec's environment plan, but we need to go beyond voluntary targets. We need corrective action and penalties to make concrete steps forward. This is why we need a national regulatory strategy. The Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie, for a party that says that it favors climate change, it is very strange to see that here there are no targets for CO2, and this compromises the Montreal Exchange. We need to deal, we need not only, they are threatening the environment and the economy. The Honourable Minister of the Environment. Mr. Speaker, we met with the people responsible for the Montreal emissions exchange. We need the Montreal exchange to actually take concrete action to provide cleaner air. We need the necessary checks and balances for real reductions.
Danforth.
Mr. Speaker, the threat of climate change is the number one challenge of facing the number one threat for everyday Canadians, and we as parliamentarians have a responsibility to act on the matter and to act immediately. So my question is to the Prime Minister, will he confirm to this House and to all Canadians today that the standoff has in fact come to an end, and that the Clean Air Act will be sent to a special legislative committee prior to second reading, so that this Parliament can get on with the job of reducing pollution, greenhouse gas emissions, and get some results for Canadians?
The Right Honourable the Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure I would characterize anything here as a standoff. The leader of the NDP asked me in my office yesterday if the government would put this bill to a committee before second reading. I told him that was under consideration. I called him 20 minutes later after consulting my colleagues to confirm that we're willing to do that, and the House Leader will consult the House leaders of the other parties on the best way to proceed.
The Honourable Member for Toronto Danforth.
Mr. Speaker, it is a very important step that we are taking to try to have an agreement, and we will have a legislative committee to study the bill. We want him to take these considerations seriously, take a constructive approach. I would ask the Prime Minister whether he is serious or not about changing direction and taking a constructive approach to climate change. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Once again, Mr. Speaker, the NDP leader asked me to send the bill, Bill C-30, to committee before second reading. We are prepared to do that. I hope that by doing that, we will be able to come up with positive and constructive ideas from the opposition. The NDP leader wanted to do that with his private members' bill, but I think the other opposition members are going to be able to contribute this way. It is important if someone wants to criticize a plan, the person should have his or her own plan.
Union bill.
Mr. Speaker, today, Canadian seniors and other investors, as a consequence of this government's broken promise, saw $25 billion of their hard-earned savings go up in smoke in 2 hours of trading. And in comparison, the government's pathetically small tax relief is $1 billion over a whole year. So with the loss in 2 hours of trading, 25 times bigger than the tax relief that this government is providing, how can they claim that this day of infamy, this Black Wednesday, is anything other than a total disaster for those who...
Order. The Honourable the Minister of Finance.
The member opposite would never go over the top, Mr. Speaker, I know. You know,
Order. The Honourable the Minister of the Finance has the floor to respond to the question asked by the Honourable Member for Union-Markham-Ville. We'll have a little Markham-Unionville, I'm sorry. We'll have a little order.
thank you, Speaker. You know, after 13 years in government, Mr. Speaker, and some time in opposition, as of October 18th this year, the member for Markham said this about his party's position on this important subject for all Canadians. What he said is, we don't have a definitive position on this. This is what the former government offered. They offered confusion. We have provided clarity. They offered more confusion for independent families and their tax responsibilities. We offer balance in terms of corporations paying their fair share of taxes going forward in Canada.
Order. Order. The Honourable Member for Markham-Unionville. Order. Order. The Honourable Member for Markham-Unionville.
Mr. Speaker, let me explain to the House what this Minister of Finance offers. He offers a gross failure to manage the economy, a betrayal of investors who mistakenly took this minister and this government at their word, the single biggest blow to Canadians' wealth ever dealt by a finance minister, and a banana republic process bringing disrepute to Canadian capital markets. It's obvious that this minister has been a disaster on this file. When will the Prime Minister fire him?
Order. The Honourable Minister of Finance. Order.
You know, Mr. Speaker, the RCMP are not investigating my Department of Finance. They're investigating your Department of Finance. And you know, Mr. Speaker, there were no leaks. There were no emails. There were no deals with friends on Bay Street. There was confidentiality, deliberation, and the provision of certainty for capital markets in Canada. And finally, an effort to create fairness for individual taxpayers and their families while you protect your big...
Order, please. The Honourable Member for Outremont. Mr. Speaker, what happened yesterday was a broken promise, was a broken, betrayed word. On January 13th, 2006, the Prime Minister said clearly that the government, a Conservative government, would not impose any new taxes. That's what he said on January 13th. Why did the Prime Minister lie to Canadians? Why did he break his word? The Honourable Minister of Finance. The words in the question, I do have problems with those words, but if the Minister of Finance would like to answer, he may.
There was a substantial commitment, Mr. Speaker, to provide security for seniors in this country. Yesterday we made a very important announcement with respect to an issue that has been outstanding in this country for more than 40 years, and that is the question of income splitting for pensioners. And I know the Liberals opposite don't think it matters much for pensioners, but if you look at a pensioner now receiving a pension of $40,000, one spouse, and the other spouse not receiving any pension, the tax savings will be $2,500 for that couple. I know Liberals don't think that's much money, but it's a lot of money for a lot of Canadian pensioners.
The Honourable Member for Outremont. Mr. Speaker, you have to have a lot of nerve to believe that what was done yesterday was worth pensioners and other investors losing $25 billion. The minister, in fact, lied. He lied to financial circles and to Canadian taxpayers. He lied to everyone about this. The Honourable Member for Outremont knows very well that these words cannot be used in the House. Therefore, the question is unacceptable, and we will move on. The Honourable Member for Roberval-Lac-Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, the Conservative government is trying to pass legislation that will mean a very substantial increase in judges' income. That will be there will be a higher part of it that will be tax exempt, $14,000 to $21,000, a substantial increase of 7.25% in salary. But in fact, pensioners and older people are being laid off in large numbers, and there's no help for them. The Parliamentary Secretary.
Member for his question. It's important to note that it is this Parliament's responsibility under our Constitution to establish judicial salaries and benefits, and it's ultimately up to Parliament to consider and approve any proposed amendments. The committee has considered this bill, Bill C-17, and it will be up to Parliament to approve it.
The Honourable Member for Roberval-Lac-Saint-Jean. I don't know whether the government realizes that one of its primary responsibilities under the Constitution is to look after people who are poor, older workers, 60 years and so on, who've worked for years, lose their jobs because of massive layoff. Then the government has a responsibility, but the government refuses to take that responsibility. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice.
Member for his question, and we heard from the Minister of Finance of the important steps that are being taken to address seniors and pensioners and older workers, and it is ultimately Parliament's responsibility on the issue of judicial compensation to approve this judicial compensation. Thank you.
The honourable member for Vaudreuil-Soulanges. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The American government is against employees having dual citizenship to rely on military contracts given to the CIA. This discrimination goes against the Quebec and Canadian Charter of Rights. Will the government protest with the American authorities regarding this violation of the Charter, or will it tolerate and say nothing? The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank my colleague.
Mr. Speaker, with the highest levels of the American government, my colleague, the Minister of Defense, the Minister of Industry, myself, We have engaged already in an effort to deal specifically with the unfairness that the honourable member speaks of. We've established a working group in the Department of Foreign Affairs, complete with American officials, to find a suitable solution to this issue, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Vaudreuil-Soulanges. But the Charter prohibits discrimination based on nationality and racial profiling. The American government is using the pretext of security to do this. Will the government do anything about this? The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
I've outlined already, Mr. Speaker, what we're doing about this. We raised it immediately after consulting with industry. We've had a number of occasions to speak directly to the American ambassador. Mr. Negroponte was here about 2 weeks ago. We raised it with him. I spoke directly to Secretary of State Rice about this. We put together a working group specifically aimed at finding a solution. We'll continue to do so, and I would appreciate the cooperation of the House and members opposite.
The honourable member for Winnipeg South Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, by slamming the door on his counterpart from Ontario, the Minister of Indian Affairs has shown how indifferent he is to resolving the crisis at Caledonia. His actions are not befitting those of a Minister of the Crown. In fact, they are reminiscent of a petulant child. I ask the Prime Minister, will he remove this file from the Minister's responsibility and instead assign it to a minister who understands the importance of immediately resolving the situation at Caledonia?
The Honourable, the Minister of Indian Affairs and Northern Development.
Mr. Speaker, I cancelled the meeting because I felt that the political grandstanding of the Premier of Ontario was irresponsible. And I see today that they are comparing their conduct to, quote, full contact sport. So I rest my case, Mr. Speaker. I intend to take this matter seriously and to discharge my abilities and my responsibilities with the seriousness that they deserve. I know the difference between a hockey game and public governance. If the Premier and his colleagues in Ontario have forgot that difference, it's between them and their voters, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Winnipeg South Centre.
Mr. Speaker, it's not game time. A provincial minister travels to Ottawa to meet with his federal counterpart. He takes time from his busy schedule and spends taxpayer money to travel. When arriving in the minister's office, Mr. Speaker, he's greeted with stomping feet, slamming doors, and the cancellation of a pre-arranged meeting. Is this a Conservative caucus meeting, Mr. Speaker?
Probably.
No, that's how the Minister of Indian Affairs treats a colleague. When will the minister show true leadership, accept the federal government's responsibility, and personally meet with the many stakeholders?
Right. Honourable the Minister of Indian Affairs and Northern Development.
Speaker, I have indicated I'm prepared to meet with the Ontario Minister when they're prepared to approach this in a serious matter. This dispute is one that is taking place in the province of Ontario. It began with an Ontario company building on Ontario land with the approvals of an Ontario Municipal Board, Mr. Speaker, all under Ontario law. It then became an Ontario policing issue, and Mr. Speaker, there is no doubt that policing is an Ontario responsibility. So Ontario will need to face up to their jurisdiction and their responsibility, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Brant.
Mr. Speaker, Canada's Constitution makes it perfectly clear that land claims issues are the sole responsibility of the federal government. For the last 8 months, the Minister of Indian Affairs has been missing in action on the Caledonia dispute. The situation remains very tense in Caledonia. It's costly. It's been going on for far too long. The Minister committed to speeding up the land claims issue if the blockades came down. The blockades came down months ago. Why isn't the Minister living up to his commitment?
The Minister of Indian Affairs and Northern Development.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can inform the House, and my colleague, I think, knows this. Over the course of the last 5 weeks, I have met with Ontario's representative, Jane Stewart, a former Privy Councillor. I have met as well with the federal government's representative. I have sat down personally and met with Chief David General, the elected chief. I have met with the hereditary chief. We continue to work on this, Mr. Speaker. We are making progress at the negotiating table. And part of the message that I think Ontario needs to receive is the seriousness of this. Dealing with it at the table is what has to happen, not political grandstanding, Mr. Speaker.
The member for Brant.
Mr. Speaker, local residents are demanding action from the federal government and from their own Member of Parliament.
Despite calls from the area and the fact that the Minister of Indian Affairs hired Barbara McDougall, a former Conservative cabinet minister with no land claims experience, to handle the issue, the Conservatives pretend they shouldn't deal with the issue. Why does Caledonia's own Member of Parliament, the member for Hallam and Norfolk, refuse to take any action to help in the situation, despite the fact that she is the region's representative at the cabinet table?
The Honourable Minister of Indian Affairs and Northern Development.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member for Haldimand is involved in this. She meets with me regularly. We have complete discussions about the conduct of the file. Her thoughts on this matter guide me in the instructions that I provide to Ms. McDougall and to Mr. Deering. We will continue to work together at the negotiating table with the elected chief, Mr. Speaker, with the hereditary chief, and I would point out for the assistance of my friend that this government, myself as the minister, is the first government in Canadian history to recognize the Haudenosaunee Council and to sit down and talk to them, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Louisville. Yesterday, the Minister of Finance announced that the new government of Canada was going to increase the age credit for seniors and would enable income sharing, pension sharing for seniors. This will help seniors, particularly those who have lower incomes. Will the Minister of Industry explain the details of this announcement and how it will help all Canadians? The Honourable Minister of Industry. Mr. Speaker, first of all, I'd like to congratulate my honourable colleague, the Minister of Finance, who announced today his plan for Canadians. This plan, Mr. Speaker, confirms that we have kept our promise in the 2006 budget, and we will increase tax exemption for seniors by $1,000 and starting in 2006. And also, we will be able to split incomes. After 13 years of inaction and laissez-faire, the government is now taking its responsibility, and something that the Liberal government never did.
North.
Despite the fact that the income trust announcement yesterday is a flip-flop that could only make a Liberal proud, it is an important direction for everyday working families. The Finance Minister has set an important precedent by closing this tax loophole. As he said yesterday, income trusts are a growing trend to corporate tax avoidance. So considering the Minister's statement, will he today commit to shutting down all loopholes in Canada's tax laws, including the Barbados tax haven?
Honourable the Minister of Finance.
I thank the honourable member for her comments, and certainly we are interested in tax fairness as a fundamental principle, and we're interested in expanding the tax base. And we believe, unlike the former government, that all Canadians, including corporations, should share in the tax burden fairly. And that includes legitimately, I think, review of treaties with respect to taxation as well, to make sure that all Canadians are accepting their fair share of the tax burden.
The honourable member for Winnipeg North.
Mr. Speaker, I remind the Minister and all members that tax havens cost Canadian taxpayers billions in revenues every year. If you look at just Barbados alone, it's hiding an estimated $23 billion annually from Canadian tax collectors. All that at a time when we have a homelessness crisis, child and senior poverty is on the rise, Aboriginal Canadians live in third world conditions, and millions of average Canadians can't get the health care they need. So will the government commit today to building on the income trust announcement and closing other loopholes and cracking down on tax fraud and unlawful tax avoidance?
The Honourable the Minister of Finance.
I thank the honourable member again for the question. It's an important issue in terms of having fairness in the tax system, and I'm happy to review those issues.
The member for Halifax West.
Mr. Speaker, this mean-spirited minority government has turned its back on vulnerable Canadians. They slashed programs that teach people to read and write, that would have provided daycare spaces for our kids. But destroying their dreams wasn't good enough. They had to insult them too. Yesterday, the Minister of Human Resources said the hurt imposed by the cuts to her budget was the equivalent of having to do without a cup of coffee. Shame! Will she apologize for her spiteful statement that demeaned the most vulnerable in our society?
The Minister of Human Resources and Social Development.
Mr. Speaker, this government cares about the vulnerable in our society. That's why we're spending so much money on them. But, Mr. Speaker, we also have a responsibility to them. We have a responsibility to all Canadians to make sure that all of their dollars are well spent. And yes, Mr. Speaker, there are cuts to our programs. We're cutting programs that are not delivering results for Canadians. And on the scale, though, Mr. Speaker, it's very small. It's 2/10 of 1%, Mr. Speaker. But we are going to deliver results for Canadians. We will fund programs that are good for Canadians.
Honourable Member for Halifax West.
Mr. Speaker, the Saskatchewan Literacy Network closing its doors. Yukon is losing its literacy coalition. The Canadian Labour and Business Centre already closed. Employment equity offices in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick closing. 25,000 summer jobs for students gone. Some cup of coffee, Mr. Speaker. Is the minister unaware of how hurtful her cuts are because she didn't bother to consult any of these groups?
The Right Honourable the Prime Minister. Order.
Mr. Speaker, on a day where the Liberal Party is standing up defending zero taxes for big corporations and opposing income splitting and tax breaks for seniors, they should be ashamed of themselves to ask that kind of grandstanding question.
The honourable member for Oakville.
That was very embarrassing.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Minister of Human Resources was repeatedly asked for details about $152 million in cuts to her department. Though the cuts were announced a month ago, she was unable to identify where the cuts are to take place. Mr. Speaker, this minister has had 5 weeks to disclose to Canadians what programs will be cut and how Canadian lives will be affected. Does she not know what's going on in her own department, or what is she trying to hide?
The Honourable the Minister of Human Resources and Social Development.
Mr. Speaker, I'd be happy to tell Canadians just what we're cutting. We're cutting programs that were approved by the Liberals. We're cutting programs that paid $71,000 to upgrade a website. We're cutting programs that one little group paid $66,000 for travel. We're cutting programs, Mr. Speaker, that the Liberals brought in where an executive director made $150,000 a year. That's even more than a Liberal senator.
The Honourable Member for Oakville.
Mr. Speaker, at committee yesterday, the minister proved that she was very good at hiding from literacy groups. When asked to list the groups with whom she widely consulted, the minister was unable to name a single literacy group. This must come as a surprise to those in her own riding who submitted an 800-signature petition against the cuts. And what about the petition signed by a coalition of literacy groups in Quebec? Were they consulted, Mr. Speaker? Will the minister now specifically name which literacy groups she met with prior to announcing these cuts?
Honourable the Minister, the Honourable. Order. We're now going to hear from the Honourable the President of the Treasury Board.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government consults widely with Canadians, Mr. Speaker, but I want to list on this first anniversary of the Garmin Report some of the people we don't consult with. We don't consult with people by the name of Willette, of Dingwall, of Quarryrow, or of Bro, Mr. Speaker. We don't consult with people named Galliano. We don't consult with people who put $7,000 of cash in envelopes on restaurant tables, Mr. Speaker. We hear the quieter voices, hard-working middle-class taxpayers, and that's who we'll always listen to, Mr. Speaker.
Order.
The Honourable Member for Richmond, Arthabaska. Mr. Speaker, the President of the UPA has said he's very concerned about the government's attitude and who is worried that he is now going to be questioning the role of the wheat board and the dual marketing system. Does the Minister admit that this attack against the WCB opens the door to similar attacks against supply management? The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, of course, is moving ahead with our campaign promise to allow marketing choice for Western Canadian farmers who want to have a chance to market their own products in a marketing choice world. Mr. Speaker, of course, that was a campaign promise, as was our support for the supply management system. Mr. Speaker, we supported it during the campaign. I supported it at Geneva and international conferences, and Mr. Speaker, it receives the full support of this government.
The Honourable Member for Richmond, Arthabaska. I would invite the Minister to read the latest editorial from our region with respect to Quebec's concern. The wheat board and supply management are based on two similar marketing systems. So I would like the Minister of Agriculture to explain why he is not contesting supply management when in fact he is doing this to the wheat board. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
What we'll be asking Western Canadian farmers in this plebiscite is, Mr. Speaker, is do they want the same freedom of choice that Quebec farmers have to market their grain? It's no different, Mr. Speaker. We're not going to ask them to do something we wouldn't ask or isn't already available for farmers in Quebec. It'll be a clear question on barley. We think farmers want to have that question put to them. There's certainly a demand by the opposition. We'll have a plebiscite on that, Mr. Speaker. I hope that farmers will decide to move forward on marketing choice on barley. Mr. Speaker, we said during the election we'd give them choice, Mr. Speaker. We said that we'd move on behalf of them, and we are moving on behalf of farm families in Canada.
The Honourable Member for Notre-Dame-Lagos-Lachine.
A victim of the Dawson College shooting, said that when he awoke from his coma, he was devastated to learn three things. One, his friend Anastasia was dead. Two, he would have to live with bullets in his head. And three, his own Prime Minister was going to eliminate the gun registry. Hayter's question to the Prime Minister, and I quote, "I want him to explain to me why he wants to dismantle a gun registry proven to have saved many lives and which costs next to nothing to maintain."
The Honourable the Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, I can tell you we certainly share in the grief of what happened at Dawson College. And this particular individual, Mr. Kadim, we have tried to actually get in touch with him today, and his press secretary informed us that he'd try and get back to us. They were quite busy. I've offered to meet with them in Montreal on Monday. He may have some insights, and I'll also share, Mr. Speaker, that our view is to have more effective gun control and also to have a more effective process for those who are applying to have guns of any kind, Mr. Speaker, would face a more rigorous process. We agree with him. We want to see effective gun control.
The Honourable Member for Charlevoix, Haut-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, in Montreal and elsewhere in Quebec, we are witnessing a troubling rise in serious crime committed by street gangs and young offenders. Can the Minister of Justice tell the House what the government intends to do to prevent these crimes? The Honourable Minister of Transport. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of course, during the last budget, we earmarked $20 million for programs to help young people and youth. But let's be clear about this, Mr. Speaker. We have never, and we have no intention whatsoever to amend the age of responsibility. Those who claim otherwise, such as Mr. Gravel, the Bloc candidate, are not simply telling the truth. And the same Mr. Gravel knows the 8th commandment, God's 8th commandment.
Le député de Surrey.
The Honourable Member for Surrey North.
Mr. Speaker, last night a disturbing report by CTV News uncovered voluntary plastic surgeries were taking up valuable time in hospital operating rooms from coast to coast to coast. The Minister of Health complimented the journalist on her excellent piece and told her that he'd be hearing from provincial ministers on the issue. Could he now report to the House how many provincial health ministers he has encouraged to end this practice and when he plans to register formally his concern with the provinces about this practice?
Honourable the Minister of Health.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can tell the honourable member I have not heard from my colleagues yet. Operators are standing by, however, and in the meantime I can report to this chamber that as a result of the excellent budget 2006, we've got an extra $1.2 billion of health transfers going to the provinces to focus on the important medical conditions and the important procedures that every single Canadian has a right to ask for from a government that is delivering. And Mr. Speaker, we are delivering, the Minister of Finance has delivered, and I'm very proud of the Minister of Finance.
Honourable member for Surrey North.
Mr. Speaker, over 2 years ago, this House of Commons passed an NDP motion to ban trans fats in Canada. The entire city of New York will soon be trans fat free. Even the worst of the worst fast food has changed their ways. But the health minister is nowhere to be found on this issue. Trans fats are scientifically proven to drastically increase risk of heart attacks. Totally unnecessary. Well, the minister announced today that Canada will officially be the second country in the world to ban trans fats in our food.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
As she is well aware, there is a report that is under consideration by the Canadian public as well as by the Government of Canada regarding this very issue. We are certainly studying it very closely, but the Honourable Member neglected to mention that food companies after food companies in this country have voluntarily gone trans fat free or radically reduced their trans fat, and we would encourage that trend to continue.
Order. I'd like to draw to the attention of honourable members the presence in the galleries today of young people who are participating in the Take Our Kids to Work program. Le programme Invitons nos jeunes au travail.
This program offers the participants the opportunity of seeing the real world of work.